Put this one up. Put this one up. All right, Genesis chapter 10. All right. Shannon, would you open us in a word of prayer, please? Amen. All right. Genesis 10. And we'll start at about 21. We got done with Ham. We went into Shem, his children here. And so verse 21, it says, unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber. And Eber, remember, is the name that the word Hebrews comes from. And actually, I was looking at that, and in another place, Heber starts with an H. So that's even one more step toward the word Hebrews. And so that's where that is. And so he's the brother of Japheth the elder. Even to him were children born. And so the children of Shem, Elam, and Asher, and Arphaxad, and Lud, and Aram. And remember now, we covered verse 22 and talked about the Elamites and the Assyrians, which is through Asher. And Arphaxad, that's where you get your Chaldeans, is through Arphaxad. Remember, we mentioned that last time, in Lud and Aram. And then Aram, of course, means the highland. And that's where Aramaic comes from. And your Armenians. And so there are different derivations of Aram here. And so, and also Aram is where your Syrians come from. And so they are Shemites, your Syrians. And so to actually think that the Antichrist, remember, is a Syrian and half Jewish, he's still full-blood Shemite. So if you think of it like that, he's still Shemite. And so, and then the children of Aram, verse 23, Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash. And so Aram, everyone knows what Uz is. Uz means firmness, and Uz is the Edom of biblical times, which today is Jordan. Okay, it's Jordan. And of course, the famous founder of the land of Uz is where Job lived. Job 1 verse 1. It's the land of Uz. And so, and also, that's where Israel will take refuge in the tribulation. Turn to Lamentations chapter 4. Lamentations chapter 4, right after the book of Jeremiah. Now, Job 1:1, I'll go over there and read this. And there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And so Job was a Shemite, although, and you could say he was of the children of Eber. He just wasn't a Hebrew because there was no such thing yet. And so, but he was a Shemite. And so Lamentations chapter 4, and now this is in the tribulation period. Oh, past it. Right before Ezekiel. Chapter 4 and verse 21. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz. So right there it tells you that Uz is in the land of Edom. And so the cup also shall pass through unto thee. Thou shalt be drunken and shalt make thyself naked. Now, of of course, the context of this is tribulation right here. And so that's where they will go, to the land of Edom. And we're going to actually see that in another name in a minute. All right, and what else is there in the land of Edom? And so, now probably the children of Aram had more direct contact with the descendants of Abraham than the others did, actually. And so little is known of the four sons of Aram except really Uz, and who God is introducing to you in Genesis chapter 10. And he mentions these names because if you continue reading your Bible, you'll come across these names later, like Uz and Job and everything. And so when you get to that name, then you'll know, oh yeah, that was back there in Genesis chapter 10. And so God is introducing you to those names. And so we know Uz from Job chapter 1. And so now the others, Hol, Gether, and Mash, are essentially unknown actually, but evidently were important in the days from Shem to Moses, because God mentions the children of Aram where he doesn't mention any other children of Shem. And so, of course, he doesn't mention the children of Mash and of Gether and of Hol, but he does mention the children of, or the land of Uz, and we know that. And then, let's see, in the children of Shem, verse 22, Elam and Asher and Arphaxad. Then he goes back to Arphaxad. He doesn't mention any more about Lud and who his children are. And so, but Arphaxad begat Selah, and Selah begat Eber. And so now, Hol, right there, it says Uz and Hol and Gether. Hol means circle, and his descendants are not located for sure, but probably around Armenia and western Syria. That's where Hol is from. Hol means circle. Gether became the Bactrians of India. And so we'll find out later that the Koreans actually came from India as well. And so Milette's not here tonight, which she was wondering about the Koreans and where they're from. The Koreans are Shamite. However, there's a mixture of Chinese in there along with the Koreans. And that's where they came from. And so Gether came from the Bactrians of India. And so the Gether, there's some mixture and some intermingling there. And that's where the Koreans come from. And Mash came from the Messenians and Charax Spacini. And so around the same area of Armenia and Assyria. And in fact, Mash, if you look at other words that has Mash in it, like Michmash, for example, probably Mash has something to do with Michmash. And so and you'll hear that name here in 1 Samuel as we're studying. And so Gether is India. And so the Guti were the first to begin driving out the Hamites from Babylonia. The Guti were the Bactrians, the children of Gether, son of Aram. After Nimrod's death in 2123 AM, the Guti, or the Bactrians, started running the Hamites out of their land. They got tired of Nimrod's doctrine and their religion, and they started running the Hamites out of that area. And so so the group of Hamites would fled, and they fled to the area of the Kopan River in India. They didn't drive them out of India, but actually drove them further into India, supposedly. And Josephus actually talks about this in his complete works. And Josephus states that the sons of Joktan, son of Eber, and the sons of Eber inhabited the land up to the Kopan River in India. And when the Hamites fled to that area, the inhabitants of Joktan drove them even further into India instead of driving them out of India. And so you have within the Indian people, and I'm not talking about the American Indians, okay, the Native Americans. We're talking about the Indians of India. And so there was an intermingling of those Hamites with the Bactrians that formed the Koreans along with the Chinese. So you can see how everything kind of intermingles there. And so the Hamites wound up settling in the Indus Valley and became known as the Dravidians, which was the start of the Vedic race. And their religion was an outgrowth of the original false religion developed by Nimrod. Why? It's Hamite. They were Hamites. And a century or two later, a Japhetic race came down and intermingled with the Hamitic Dravidians. And they brought with them the Aryan language known as Sanskrit. If you've ever heard of the Sanskrit language, that came from Japheth and the Dravidians and the intermingling there of Ham and Japheth. A Hindu poem written in Sanskrit called the Rig Veda is dated about the same time as the Exodus from Egypt, around 1450 BC. So the difference between Nimrod's death and the Exodus is 325 years. And during that time, that 325 years, the Hindu religion happened. It was developed in those 325 years. And so that's where Hindu came from, Hinduism. Hinduism teaches that the earth, Hinduism actually, a lot of the myth in there corroborates with Noah's flood actually. The starting of it does. And they teach that the earth has been destroyed many times. And in the last destruction, a man named Satyavarta, also called Manu, built a ship and escaped a great flood. We know him as Noah, okay? And they landed on Mount Hivamet in North India, okay? And so, of course, it's Armenia, the land of Armenia in Turkey, Mount Ararat. And so they say Mount Hivamet in North India. And so even inside Hinduism, there are memories of real history, actual history of Noah and the flood. Now, Hinduism and Wicca are the purest and oldest forms of the Babylonian mystery religion, actually. Both teach magic, astrology, multiple gods, evolution, and reincarnation. We covered a lot of those when we were talking about the sorcery of the fallen angels, if you'll remember, a few Wednesday nights ago. And the evolution and reincarnation. And both Hinduism and Wicca also teach the doctrine of emanation. Remember, we talked about that, along with the sorcery of the fallen angels, if you'll remember. And remember, the doctrine of emanation it states that the energy of God, or the original creator force, has emptied himself into man. That's the doctrine of emanation. That when God created man, he put a little bit of himself in each person, and there's no longer God anymore, because he's in you. That's what they teach. Well, that's not true. You're not going to become a God someday, okay? Which is what they teach. That's what the doctrine of emanations is, that you will reincarnate, or the evolution process is you will be gods, but that's just what Satan told Eve. Yeah, they do. Mormons teach that you'll become a god. And you'll have your own planet and all this stuff. And you'll have and that men will have all these wives that will continually have babies, and that's the future for women. You just continue to get pregnant and have babies for the rest of eternity. I know it's exactly what you want to do for eternity, right? It's not. That's a nightmare for a woman. It's not something a woman looks forward to, if they're honest about it. So anyway, and so the doctrine of emanation teaches that man has a little piece of the creator force in them. And so in Hinduism, this is called the Atman, A-T-M-A-N, the Atman. And in Wicca, the concept is taught, but does not have a name, actually. And so now the legend among the Korean people says they were originally populated by the descendants of Joktan, son of Eber. And we'll cover that later on. Remember, there was a split off of Eber, Peleg, and Joktan. And Joktan is the line that a lot of your, even Gene Kim, I talked to Gene Kim this week about it. And he says, yes, in fact, the Orient comes from the line of Joktan. And I know the Asian people doesn't like to say the Orientals, but actually Gene Kim calls it the Orientals. And the Orient is what it's called. And so he says that a lot of the Asian culture comes from that. But we did prove last time that DNA, that the Japanese line, their DNA suggests no known ties to Shem, which is very interesting. And so I told Gene Kim that, and he said, oh, that's very interesting, because he's heard that. And in his teaching on Genesis in this passage, he actually didn't believe that. And when I told him that the DNA suggests that, he said, oh, that's very interesting. He's like, you've got little nuggets that, that you're finding that I didn't find. And so he likes stuff like that. And so he said that was very interesting. But we both agreed that the line of the Asian culture did come from Joktan. And so, now, according to Wikipedia, and you can go and find this on Wikipedia, mitochondrial DNA, it's the mtDNA, that's what mitochondria stands for, suggests that the Koreans show a close genetic relationship with Mongolians, which we found out are through Japheth. The Mongolian race was through Japheth, and the Liaoning Han Chinese. And now we're going to look at something here. And so, let me grab this real quick. So, and we'll go back over this for Milette's sake probably next week if she comes on a Sunday night, because she was interested, and she's actually the one that wanted me to dig into this a little bit. But your Koreans, they are a part Mongolian, which is from Japheth. And then you have the Liaoning Han, which is Ham. Because remember what we said last week, that the name Sin and Sinim, Sinim means Chinese, and it's through the line of Ham, actually. But now Chinese, I'm getting ready to show you something where they have some DNA of Shem also. So Chinese has a little bit of all three, Japheth, Shem, and Ham in them. And we already looked at that actually because a lot of Japhethites going over to China settled in China. A lot of the Japhethites, and we went through that a couple of Sundays ago when we were in the line of Japheth. And so this is very interesting. And so that you can see the intermingling of all three nations here, all three sons of Noah and the Chinese people. All right, so the Liaoning Han Chinese is Ham. Genetically, Koreans, though, are closer to the Chinese people. There's more ties to the Chinese than the Mongolese, actually. And so secular historians identify the first recorded Chinese dynasty. Now, I'm going to close that so the fan doesn't blow it. But the Chinese dynasty was the Xia dynasty. Okay? This was the very first dynasty recorded, goes all the way back to Shem, back to Noah and Shem. And so this it's also called Hosea dynasty also, but they're both the same dynasty. And this is 1700 BC. Actually, 2100 BC to 1700 BC. This is when this dynasty ran, was along these years, which this is around the time of the flood. 2100 BC is. Okay? And so, now this dynasty was replaced in 1700 BC by what's known as the Shang dynasty. And this would place the beginning of the Zia dynasty about 150 years after the death of Shem, actually. So this one starts about the death of Shem. That's where this one starts. And so Shem could have been the one that started it. The first written Chinese history appears in the Shang dynasty. And the Shang dynasty took off from 1700 BC to 1127 BC. And so the first written Chinese history appears in the Shang dynasty about 200 years after the Tower of Babel. After the tower. So that gives you a little bit of idea when all this was going on. And actually downstairs in my filing cabinet, I have the history of Chinese down there written. And it's got a lot of interesting things, and I forgot to grab that. But anyway, in Beijing, China, there is a place called the Temple of Heaven, built about 1500 AD. Now it's built after AD, after the death of Christ. And so 1500 AD it's called. And it was the center of the worship of Shangdi, or he's known as the heavenly ruler. So Shangdi. And this worship of Shangdi included a border sacrifice, kind of like Noah's sacrifice in chapter 9. Okay, it's the same kind of a sacrifice, which means they got this from Noah or Shem, this border sacrifice. At each New Year's ceremony, the emperor sacrificed a bull on the marble altar of the Temple of Heaven, in their temple. They invoked the aid of the creator of the universe, Shangdi, to grant wisdom to the emperor to govern the people in the following year. There were no idols in the temple of Shangdi. Now today, if you went into this temple, you'd see idols there, because they've become pagan now. And although this worship still goes on, there's idols present, and although they make mention of Shangdi, there's other idols there now. And that's just bringing it up, because everything gets perverted sooner or later over time. And we understand that. According to Confucius, no, I'm not getting ready to tell a joke, okay? Shu Jing, which is the book of history, Shun, the founder of the Zia dynasty. Now, who's Shun? Shem, right? It's almost the same. So the Zia dynasty, the founder, his name was Shun, which is Shem. It's a Chinese word for Shem. He's the founder of the Zia dynasty. He offered the border sacrifices to Shangdi, the creator of the universe, which is God. The Chinese Shangdi is the heavenly ruler, God, and according to Chinese legends, Shangdi created the first man. From the first man came a succession of legendary sage leaders ending with U, which is Y-U, okay? So these were the followers here. The Mio or Mayo, or however you say that in Chinese, these people, which is southern China, say that you is the 10th generation from Adam. Who would that be? That would be Noah, right? He's the 10th generation from Adam. And Adam, of course, was called a different name. And so this is Noah. And that this you created a ship to survive a great flood. And all peoples descended from you. So the Miatsu people of China. Now, all right, now, let me read this excerpt here. The Miatsu people of China are divided into 11 tribes, which are said to be descended from a man named Xiangwang. Xiangwang was the son of Gangan Nuang, who was the son of Janku Davu. And so Janku Davu was a descendant of Gawandan Muwan, who was the son of Tutan, who was a descendant of Goman. You know who Goman is in Chinese? Gomer. Gomer is the son of Japheth. And so the Miatsu people of China are different than other peoples. But this Miatsu people of China came from Japheth, from Gomer. And so, Goman, or Gomer, was the son of Lo Japu. Lo, which is Japheth, right? And who was the son of Nuah, N-U-A-H, which is Noah, a different spelling. As Noah survived the great flood in a large boat, other sons of Noah were Lohan. Who's the Han people? Huh? Ham, yeah. Ham, which is the Liang Han. It's the people of Ham. And then another was Lo Shen. Another name, which is Shem. Another part of the legend gives the names of Lohan as Kusa, which is Cush, and Misei, which is Mizraim, and the names of the sons of Shen as Elon, which is Elam, and Nagashur, which is Asher. So this is all in the culture of the Chinese people, in their writings and everything, just different names. And so of the 11 Miatsu tribes, 6 intermarried with other peoples who settled in the area, forming the Chinese nation, while 5 remained a pure, distinct people among the Chinese, which is where your Shemites come from. Those 5 are Shemite from the Chinese, which is where the Korean people, see, they came from those 5 Shemite tribes of China. And so, which among them, they intermingled with the Japhethites, the Mongolians. And so that's where the Koreans came from, the Mongoloid and the Chinese people. And so that's just a little bit of interesting stuff there. And that's Millet. I didn't know they were going to leave since William hurt his foot. I thought, oh, they're going to be here Sunday night. So I made sure I'd studied that. But I'll have to give it again next week. And so the Chinese have several legends and written records tracing China back to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then the Koreans are a mixture of Chinese and Mongolians. Now, Genesis chapter 10. Let me open this back up here. Genesis chapter 10, look at verse 24 again. It says, and Arphaxad begat Selah, and Selah begat Eber. And so this Selah means extension. And other names of Selah are Shelah. 1 Chronicles 1:18 changes the name to Shelah, Chelah, which if you take the H out, it's Selah. And so Selah, now Ruckman in his Genesis commentary says that he doesn't know where a Selah is geographically, but if you look at the other forms of Selah like Shelah or Selah, you know where it's at? It's in the land of Edom with Uz. It's Selah Petra down in the land of Edom. That's where all the catacombs are. And so that's where it's at. Petra is Petra is called the rock city. That's what Selah means is rock. And, well, Petra means rock. I think I have Selah mentioned here. We'll get to it. Oh, yes, I have Selah right here. Selah means rock. And Petra is what? Means stone or something like that? Because of Peter, Simon Peter. And so, every time you see this word Selah, just like, no, okay, first of all, let's back up a little bit. Selah is mentioned 75 times in your Bible, okay, throughout the book of Psalms and the book of Habakkuk. Selah is mentioned there. But outside of the Psalms and Habakkuk, it's mentioned one, maybe two times in Scripture. Turn to 2 Kings chapter 14. This is one of them, 2 Kings chapter 14. 2 Kings chapter 14. Selah in itself, if it's not mentioned in poetry, if it's mentioned outside of poetry, it's only mentioned once here. And then there's another way, I'm not sure if I have it written down here, but it's the name of it is Selah Hamakoth, or something like that. And the rock of desolation, or something, is what it means. And so, but here, 2 Kings chapter 14, and look at verse 7, it says, he slew of Edom in the valley of Salt 10,000, and took Selah by war, and called the name of it Joktheel unto this day. And so Selah is in the land of Edom, down around the same area as the land of Uz, actually. And we just proved that Uz was in the land of Edom as well. And so, now, let's see. So it's the rock city, basically. Every time you see this word Selah, you will see a reference to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Every time you see it in the book of Psalms, in the book of Habakkuk, or is it, Habakkuk. I was thinking, is it Haggai? But no, it's Habakkuk. It's mentioned 3 times, I think, in the book of Habakkuk. Selah is. And every time you see that word, there's a reference to the second coming of Christ within 2 to 3 verses before or after. It's always a reference to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Every single time. You say, what's mentioned here in 2 Kings chapter 14? Yeah, you know what that's a picture of. Remember, it says, my God is coming from Edom, it says in the book of Psalms. Yeah, he touches down and destroys Edom there, where Petra is, Selah Petra. And so that's a picture of the second coming of Jesus Christ right there. Now remember that also about this word Selah, Selah is only recognized by scholars as a pause or a musical note throughout the book of Psalms. but it just doesn't denote a musical note throughout the Psalms. There's another application. It's a doctrinal, prophetical application there, and that's to the second coming of Jesus Christ. But it is also a musical note. I don't want to take away from that. It is that too. And so, now Selah does mean rock. And so, it is the rock mentioned over and over again in the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. He says that the rock, the rock, the rock. Our God is not as our rock is not as their rock, he says. And we've gone there before looking at it. And Deuteronomy 32, if you look at the whole passage, the entire song of Moses deals with the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's a picture of Christ coming back at the second advent. And so the Jewish remnant will be going south of the Dead Sea. Right? Now, if you look on the map, here's the Dead Sea. So south of the Dead Sea is Edom, where Selah Petra and the land of Uz is. And so what happens in the tribulation period, they're here in Jerusalem and Bethlehem, they'll go south of the Dead Sea into the rock caverns of Selah Petra. There's catacombs in there that's been there for many, many years, probably thousands of years. And it's down around this area, actually, that they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls? Down around the same area of Edom. See? And so all of that's tied together there. And so the Jewish remnant will go south of the Dead Sea into the rock city to hide in the last few hours before the rock, Jesus Christ, sets up his stone kingdom, right? Book of Daniel. And he'll return and save them in the nick of time on a white horse. And I'm not talking about Dwayne Johnson, the rock, right? We're talking about Jesus Christ, the rock. All right, now, back to Genesis chapter 10 there. So a lot of doctrine here, a lot of prophecy, prophetical stuff here. And so, and Arphaxad begat Selah, the same as the word Selah, pretty much. And Selah begat Eber. And so Eber's two sons, in verse 25, and unto Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. Now we're not going to get to Joktan tonight, but Peleg. And so now God covers Eber because he's very important for the two mainstream Shemites. Okay? What? The Asian people and the Chinese, the Koreans, the Mongolese, and the Jews, which is through Peleg. And so Peleg means a division. Okay, he means division. That's what Peleg means. And the Bible tells you that, in fact, out of all Shem's sons, actually in any name within chapter 10, Peleg is the only one, his actual name is given. The meaning of his name is given. He's the only one. I don't think that any other name was given the meaning. Just Peleg. Why? Because there was something catastrophic that happened during Peleg's day. In fact, here's something else. Here's something about Peleg now. Eber called his name Peleg. Something had to have happened in Eber's day for him to call his son Peleg. Right? Otherwise, he wouldn't have called his name Peleg. He would have named him something else. Correct? So, number one possibility is, just like Enoch named his son Methuselah, because there might have been a prophetic, something about prophecy leading up to the reason why he named his son Peleg. Or when Peleg was born, there was something catastrophic that happened. Well, you say, well, Peleg means division. So either before he was born in a prophecy that was laid out, or at the time of his birth, something caused, or someone caused a division. Chapter 11. Remember, we already said chapter 11 was written before chapter 10, because it's given you several things here. And so Peleg is a very interesting person here. And so, now, this verse here is one of the most intriguing verses in the Table of Nations. Peleg is the one to be the chosen lineage for which the Hebrew people came from, number one. And the second thing is Eber named his son in commemoration of a most memorable event, something that's not going to be easily forgotten. What? The Tower of Babel, the confusion and division of tongues. All right, that's very important. Now, for Eber to name his son after this event, it would have to have happened around the time, like we said, at the time Peleg was born, or there was a prophecy that led up to it, and he named his son that. All right, one or the other. Now, Jasher has an interesting note on this, and I'm going to show you I'm going to show you something here. And Jasher says that these are the generations of Shem. Shem begat Arphaxad, and Arphaxad begat Selah, and Selah begat Eber, and to Eber were born two children. Now get this. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the sons of men were divided, and in the latter days the earth was divided. All right? So according to the book of Jasher, Peleg's name means division. That lines up with the Bible, right? According to the book of Jasher, there was two things divided during his lifetime. The first one happened in his early days when he was born, and that's the division of people. And the other one is the division of the earth. The earth was divided. Now, a lot of scholars, and actually a lot of Bible believers actually say that there is no proof for the continental drifts and for the land masses to break apart at this time. But watch this, because I'm about to give you something that no other Bible believer will give you, actually. So now look at chapter 10. I'm going to prove from the Bible. All right? We can put this aside and say, okay, this is just a history book. Let's see if it agrees with the Bible, right? All right? Look at chapter 10, verse 5. Now watch the wording so you can get it. Watch the wording. And so verse 5 says about Japheth, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. What is he saying? He's saying the people have been divided. Okay? Why? Something happened at the Tower of Babel. We know what it was. God divided their language. And so now these guys have different language than the Hamites, and they have different language than the Shemites, right? All right, chapter 10, verse 18. It says at the last phrase, and afterward were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. Look at verse, so these people were spread abroad. They were being divided, right? All right, verse 32. These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations and their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. So it's the people that's being divided, right? All right? Now look at chapter 11, verse 8. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence. Now who's the them? It's the people, right? It's Shem, Ham, and Japheth. He divided them and divided their languages and everything upon the face of all the earth. And they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So that's the peoples being divided, right? The division of people. Okay, well, you say, well, okay, that takes care of the division of people. What about the division of the earth? All right, well, look at this now. Look at verse 25, chapter 10, verse 25. It says, and unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days was what divided? Oh, that's the earth. That's not the people. See that? In his days, the earth was divided. In other words, the continents broke into pieces and divided. Now, if you get a globe and you fit all the continents together, they almost piece together perfectly. Where it was at one time one landmass. Now, chapter 10, verse 25 says he divided the earth in his days. That means the division of people had to be before that, because he scattered them abroad upon the face of the earth. And then, according to Jasher, the division of the earth happened at the end, or toward the end of Peleg's years. So the earth are the continents, the landmass, and that's what we said back in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 when it talks about the earth. That's the land. Remember, we proved that way back then. It's not talking about the people that's on the earth. It's talking about the land itself when it says the earth. And so the people had to be scattered and divided before God could divide the land, right? And so that would have to come later. Now look at 1 Chronicles chapter 1. And guess what it says in 1 Chronicles chapter 1? It says the same thing as verse 25 in Genesis 10. Same exact thing. 1 Chronicles chapter 1. This is exciting because even your creation scientists, they say that the continents drifted apart, but they don't go into the division of people. A lot of them. I've got one of creationist commentaries, and he says it's speculation. That's what he says. Well, the Bible proves both. The Bible gives you both of them right here. And this is the reason why we study verse by verse, word for word, chapter by chapter, because you get these little nuggets here. Look at 1 Chronicles chapter 1, look at verse 19. It says, and unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of the one was Peleg, because in his days the earth was divided. See, it was divided. It did happen. And his brother's name was Joktan. So the separation, the division of the land masses and the continents had to have come later. God had to divide the people first in order to do that. And so it is reasonable to see that the division at Babel took place when both Nimrod and Eber were mature men. They were both men, they were both mature enough, and yet at the Tower of Babel when they were scattered, that's when Peleg was born. It was during that time when God came down to confound the languages. Now look at back to Genesis chapter 11, and look at verse 16. How old was Eber when this happened? When did he, well, the thing to see is, well, when did Eber have Peleg? That's the question. Chapter 11, verse 16, and Eber lived 34 years. That's 34 years and begat Peleg. So he was 34 years old when he named his son Peleg, and that's when God divided the languages and scattered them abroad in the previous verses 8 and 9. See how that works? Chronologically. That's why God gives you the genealogy of Shem after the Tower of Babel. He goes back into the genealogy that he gave in chapter 10. That's why we know that chapter 10 was written after chapter 11, actually. And that's not hard to understand because remember that story of Nahash the Ammonite and where Saul went in and took care of that? Well, God set that story up to show you something in a few minutes of what was going to happen. So God gives you the whole genealogy in chapter 10 and sets it up so you'll understand what he's fixing to do in chapter 11 at the Tower of Babel. It's all an introduction, and then he gives you some extra information and how old these people were when their sons were born in chapter 11 after the Tower of Babel. And so again, Eber was 34 years old when Peleg was born. And so this had to be when God confounded the languages and scattered them abroad upon the face of the earth. Then in Peleg's latter days, God divided the earth. If Peleg was born soon after the dispersion of the nations, it is not surprising that Eber would commemorate such an event in the name of his son. Just like Enoch did for Methuselah, right? Methuselah's whole life was wrapped up in knowing that the flood was coming. And so Peleg's name also is the only name, and we mentioned this already, it's the only name in the chapter that gives you the meaning of his name. There's no other name in chapter 10 that gives you the meaning. Now, according to some scholars, now here's an additional thing to prove that there was two divisions. Now, and I don't know this of my own self. I have to find this from someone else, okay? And so, but it's reasonable to see this. According to scholars, the word in Hebrew for divided in verse 25 is different than the Hebrew word for divided in verses 5 and 32. You know what that means? Two different words for division, meaning two different divisions. See? Now, I don't know if that's true or if they're used synonymously or not, but this is what Hebrew scholars say. Meaning that two different types of division are laid out here. Now let me read you an excerpt here. All right. Now this comes from a creationist, Henry Morris, actually. If you want to know who the commentary is by, it's Henry Morris, and he's got one of the greatest commentaries on the book of Genesis, actually. And I go to him to get scientific stuff. So anything scientific that I give you, most usually will come from him. And actually, Dr. Ruckman gives some of these same things in his commentary in Genesis, actually. And so, now he says, if it is ever actually proved that the earth once was a single landmass that somehow split apart, with the segments gradually drifting away to form the present continents, then indeed this verse might be understood to refer to such an event. What, verse 25? Because it shows that. At present, the question of continental drift is still open among scientists. In other words, they don't even know if it's true. It's still open among scientists. They still argue the fact. And creationist scientists have pointed to a number of unresolved physical difficulties with the whole idea. They don't even know, but the Bible says it is, that it actually happened. But you see how honest Henry Morris is here. He's trying to tell you that, honestly, that is still an argument among creation scientists, that this thing actually happened, the division of the land masses. In any case, it is not at all necessary to postulate continental drifting in order to account for the populations now found in remote parts of the globe. migrations undoubtedly took place across the former land bridges at the Bering Strait and the Malaysian Strait when the sea level was much lower than it now is during the centuries following the flood. So to say that nobody used the Bering Strait, that's evolution. No, Christian scientists say that. I remember she came in one Wednesday night saying, you're an evolutionist if you believe that they crossed the Bering Strait. No, creation scientists say that. And they're saved, a lot of them are saved, born-again people. And so they say migrations undoubtedly took place across these two straits when the sea level was much lower. And when much of the Earth's water was frozen in the great continental ice sheets of the glacial epoch, which was right after the Genesis flood. Furthermore, early man knew how to construct sea-going vessels. If they didn't go across there, then they traveled because they had the knowledge to build boats then, because Noah built the ark. So they had a knowledge of how to build it. That came from the three sons, obviously, of Noah. They helped to build the ark. And could easily have traveled from continent to continent by water, as much evidence from antiquity, in fact, indicates they did. See that? And so it is just possible, however, that the great store of energy beneath the earth's crust, much of which was released when the fountains of the deep were broken up. Remember, we made mention that the fountains of the great deep was broken up. And we said that the great deep were the waters in outer space, but there could be in the deep caverns too, like the Marianas Trench, the deep of the earth. And he's saying that there's a lot of pressure that was built up there, and that took place in connection with the Tower of Babel. So at the Tower of Babel, let's see, do I have this? Let me see here. Maybe it's here on another page. Well, maybe I'll cover it next week. But there's something very interesting about what happened at the Tower of Babel. There was actually great winds during that time. According to history, and some of the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about, at the Tower of Babel, after God confounded the languages and everything, there was great winds and there was an earthquake during that time. And it could have been that God was starting to break the continents around then, but it didn't form and happen until the later days of Peleg. And so I obviously don't have that here in my notes, but it is a possibility as well. And so he talks about the pressure at the time of the flood provided tremendous force needed to move continents apart, and that a further release of the energy took place in connection with the Tower of Babel. If this happened, then the rate of separation would have been rapid at first, gradually slowing down to the imperceptible present-day movements. And actually, they have proven that the continents are still moving away from each other. It's still, but it's not that much as it was back then. But now look at chapter 11 about Peleg here. It says that Peleg lived 30 years, begat Reu, and Peleg, verse 19, lived after he begat Reu 209 years, and begat sons and daughters. And so he lived a total of 239 years, right? Meaning that it could have taken 200 years for it actually start moving away. The pressure kind of got to the continents and everything and started drifting them apart. And it didn't have to happen that rapidly, actually. It could have happened over that 200 years or so. And so he's absolutely right. The rate of separation would have been rapid, but not so much as you could tell. But enough for them to put it in writing. Moses wrote it down and put it in your Bible in verse 25. And it's there twice by whoever wrote 1 Chronicles chapter 1. They put it there also. And so Now, although the question is still unsettled, it seems most likely that the division referred to in the passage was simply the geographic division resulting directly from the confusion of tongues at Babel. If something more was involved, which there is, according to verse 25, especially such a catastrophic event as a tectonic splitting up of the landmass, it does seem strange that the account of the judgment at Babel in Genesis 11 does not mention it. But it actually, in chapter 11 it doesn't, but chapter 10 verse 25 does actually. But he's honest, and he was looking at it because he knows there's an argument about it among creation scientists, and whatever there's an argument about, you have to take a look at it, right? And so a lot of controversial stuff. Anyway, all right, any comments about that? Because I know it's very interesting. Any comments?